Good evening. I'm Councilman Mitchell Brown, who is the chair of the Public Safety Committee. First, I'd like to state just a reminder to any person who takes any action to obstruct or interfere with the conduct of tonight's meeting may be charged with disturbing a lawful meeting pursuant to Columbus City Code 2317-12. And any person who enters the area of City Council chambers reserved for city officials or invited guests may be charged with criminal trespass pursuant to Columbus City Code 2311-21. Also, I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge the heartfelt feelings with regards to the passing of Fire Chief Stephen K. Woltz. It is with a heavy heart for the fire division specifically, but for the city of Columbus also. Fire Chief Woltz was the chief for almost from 1997 to 2002. He was also the state fire marshal. His passing was unexpected, and I believe that's why Director Pettis will not be here this evening, as he'll be attending the services for Fire Chief Woltz. So just a moment of silence in his behalf. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for attending tonight's Public Safety Committee hearing on the 2018 proposed budget for the Department of Public Safety, Division of Police, Division of Fire, and Division of Support Services. I would like to thank my council colleagues for attending this evening's hearings. Councilman Stenziano, welcome. Thank you for being here this evening, sir. Copies of tonight's agenda are available at the entrance of council chambers. Public safety continues to be the main priority for Mayor Ginther, equating to approximately $604 million, nearly 68% of the total general fund operating budget. Some of the highlights will be discussed in this evening's hearings will be Mayor Ginther's neighborhood safety strategy, additional recruiting classes for police and fire, and the continued implementation of the Division of Police body-worn camera program. Tonight, Assistant Director George Speaks will give an overview of the budget process for the Department of Public Safety. Police Chief Kim Jacobs, Fire Chief Kevin O'Connor, and Support Service Administrator Ramona Patz will highlight the budget proposals for the respective divisions and outline the goals for those initiatives for the coming year. I'd also have them all present and then reserve time for my colleagues to ask questions. I have changed the presentation order as Director Speaks will discuss for all those in attendance. With that, Director Speaks, the floor is yours, sir.
Safety Chair Brown, Councilmember Tyson, Councilmember Stenziano, good evening.
Oh, thank you.
On behalf of Director Pettis, we are pleased to be here tonight to present our proposed Public Safety 2018 budget. We appreciate the budget allocated to public safety as it continues to be Mayor Ginther's top funding priority, as shown by the proposed allocation of $604 million, which equates to 68% of the overall general fund budget. Our public safety forces are nationally recognized as among America's most elite divisions. And prior to talking about the proposed 2018 budget, I would first ask our division leaders to highlight some of the outstanding, innovative work being done in our neighborhoods in response to approximately 1.25 million calls a year. And I'd like to begin with Administrator Patz.
Administrator Patz, before you begin, I would like to acknowledge the attendance of my colleague Shannon Harden, Jiza Page, and President Pro Tem Tyson. Please continue.
Councilmember Brown and members of council, I'm going to talk about Division of Support Services today. The Division of Support Services mission is to provide crucial services to our first responders as well as the public in regards to keeping them safe with licenses, permits, and inspections. In regards to licenses, permits, and inspections, as of November 27th of this year, the division has issued over 21,000 licenses and permits. We've had an increase in online payments for alarm licenses, fines, and penalties of 14%, which has caused an increase of revenue of 58% since 2016. We've also inspected over 16,000 weights and measures devices. Some highlights of the crucial services that we provide include the upgrade of our 911 system. It will be to the latest next-gen 911 technology, which includes the functionality to text to 911. The City of Columbus will be one of 3 major hubs in the Central Ohio area to be able to carry text to 911 and 911 calls. The other 2 is Dublin in the northwest and MEC, which will be in the northeast. To date, Franklin County Sheriff's Office, Worthington Police Department, and Grandview Heights Police Department have connected to our system. Coming by the end of January will be the Reynoldsburg Police Department, John Glenn International Airport, the Grove City Police Department, and the Ohio State University. And text to 911 should be available by the first quarter of 2018. Secondly, the 911 Communications Center processed a total of 1.1 million calls into the 911 comm center as of November 27th. 530,000 of those were 911 calls, and 576 of those were non-emergency. Also, the third thing that occurred last year was a software program called FatPot. This was something that was added to our computer-aided dispatch system for the Columbus Fire Department. This software will allow interoperability between the fire departments, which means the ability to dispatch each other's pieces of apparatus. The only significant change for the 2018 budget is the transfer of my operations section's personnel and supplies to the Department of Finance Fleet Administration. This reduces the general fund budget by $600,000. As for revenue, license and weights and measures are projected to generate over $4 million in revenue in 2018, which is a $1 million increase from last year. This is due to some code changes for vehicle for hire and also some additions for the microtransit and some cycle taverns. Lastly, on June 15, 2017, the division moved into a new facility at 4252 Groves Road. All of my division personnel now report to that location except for my CAD support team. I would like to thank the Department of Finance and the Department of Public Safety for funding the renovation of that facility.
Thank you. Chairman Brown, if it's okay with you, I'd like to transition now to the Division of Fire and Chief O'Connor.
With respect to the Division of Fire, 2017 has been an exciting year for the Division of Fire. In January, our paramedic training program achieved national accreditation for the first time in our history. We are the only fire-based training program in the state of Ohio holding this honor, and one of only 16 in the country. Further, in July, the Commission on Fire Accreditation International awarded the Columbus Division of Fire's third award of accredited agencies. Both of these awards signify that the Division of Fire has been judged by outside, impartial bodies to be performing to the highest standards of professionalism in the country. To date, the Division of Fire has responded to over 178,000 emergency calls for service, with over 81% of these calls for service being EMS related. The division responded to this by rolling out an improved EMS response model in March of 2017. By using metrics to analyze responses, we were able to better identify ways to assure that the right resource was available at the right time and sent to the right place. With these improvements, the division was immediately able to reallocate existing personnel and place 6 additional medic units in service, resulting in decreased response times for our citizens and a decrease in EMS provider fatigue. This was the first significant change to the system in over 22 years. In 2017, the Division of Fire broadened its significant use of the metrics to expand our auto accident rescue response by adding 6 extrication ladder companies to complement our existing heavy rescue units. This expansion resulted in rescue tools arriving on scene 2 minutes faster and victims being able to be extricated from vehicles on average within 6 minutes of our arrival. All of this was accomplished by using performance standards to identify and realign existing personnel and equipment to better meet the needs of the city. As the future goes, the design for the construction of new Fire Station 35 on the Far East Side off Wagner Road has been completed, and ground is expected to be broken in the first quarter of 2018. Additionally, ground for Replacement Station 16 in North Linden has been acquired and design work has begun. As the city continues to grow, the division will continue to review and identify locations for future stations 36, 37, and 38. The Division of Fire's Recruitment, Diversity, and Inclusion Office performed over 1,140 programs, reaching over 10,000 participants last year. These programs assisted in the division's recruitment effort that resulted in the 2017 Firefighter Entrance Examination eligibility list showing 29% diversity. The Division of Fire's continuous goal was to reflect the diversity of our community throughout our workforce. The Division of Fire has done much to achieve a workforce that is diverse and inclusive, and we are firmly committed to making continued progress in this area. We are also very pleased that our new system of using community evaluators to help choose the hiring process helped to select the firefighters and learn more about the Division of Fire. Lastly, and most importantly, 2018 will see the division starting the year with more personnel, 1,578, more stations, 33, more paramedics, 667, more medic transport vehicles, 38, and more ladder companies, 16, than any time in the division's nearly 200-year history. Thank you.
And now, please, Chief Jacobs.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Chair Brown and members of council, thank you very much. With respect to the Division of Police, 2017 has been a challenging year for law enforcement in Columbus and nationally. Major cities across the country have seen an increase in homicides, and Columbus is no exception. Homicide investigations are placing a strain on our Detective Bureau, and gun violence in general is a growing concern. I certainly can. I apologize. 2017 has been a challenging year for law enforcement in Columbus and nationally. Major cities across the country have seen an increase in homicides, and Columbus is no exception. Homicide investigations are placing a strain on our Detective Bureau, and gun violence in general is a growing concern. Combined with combating the escalating opiate crisis, more is being asked of our officers in an increasingly challenging and dangerous world. That said, our officers have done a wonderful job in reducing the overall violent crime over the last decade as our population has continued to grow and staffing levels have remained largely unchanged. A new police class is starting this month, actually next Monday, and we appreciate the 70 additional officers that are pledged to be part of the 2018 budget. As we continue to develop new strategies to address violent crime, keep our neighborhoods safe, and meet community expectations, we will continue to welcome additional resources and new officers. We are one of the best trained police agencies in this country. In 2017, we worked with CFD to provide training to all police and firefighters to more quickly reach victims of attacks and get them medical help even when a critical incident is still in a very volatile state. We are using state-of-the-art techniques and best practices in our training, including handling the mentally ill, victims of trauma, the effects of PTSD, and procedural justice. Deputy Chief Quinlan and I are working with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion on a 10-year strategic plan for recruiting candidates to help us double the diversity of our division. The deployment of body cameras is going very well. We have approximately 575 cameras assigned to our personnel already, with the goal of reaching approximately 1,300 by the end of 2018. Planning work is also continuing with the goal of breaking ground in 2018 for the new police substation on the far north side. We continue to engage in a significant amount of community outreach and collaboration by the Division of Police through neighborhood meetings, social media, and a multitude of programming. Our diversity and inclusion officers, also with a new American liaison added this year, our community liaison officers, and the daily interaction that we do with our community by our own officers in patrol and elsewhere. The Linden Safe Streets efforts this year were well received by community members and will be expanded if the budget is approved. The division has reached almost 100,000 followers on Facebook, which allows us to push crime tips, request help in solving crimes and in identifying suspects, and to reach many people with human interest stories that help us build relationships of trust and show the true dedication of our personnel. Our expanding efforts to continue neighborhood nuisance abatement proceedings with other city agencies and the city attorney's office have made a great impact again this year. Not only are hotels being addressed, but apartment buildings, carryouts, and other nuisance areas. This best practice in the country was the reason that 2 of our CLOs were recognized in late 2016 at the inaugural U.S. Attorney General and Department of Justice Awards ceremony for distinguished service in community policing. Community evaluators were also used in police candidate testing in 2017 with an overall positive experience for the evaluators. Those that were involved learned more about the Division of Police and our efforts to select the next generation of officers. And lastly, like our partners in public safety, CFD, the Division of Police received the highest level of accreditation in 2017, the gold standard by CALIA, maintaining accreditation since our first award in 1999.
Now that we've covered some of the highlights of 2017 and some of the innovations that we've enacted, given your gracious budget in 2017, we'd now like to transition to the proposed budget of 2018. And that proposed budget, again, totals $604 million. That would be a 3.6 increase over this year. Specifically, the budget allocates $332.9 million for police, $256.7 million for fire, $6.8 for support services, and $7.5 for safety administration. Some of the major highlights and initiatives within the proposed budget: in fire, proposed funding of 80 recruits. That would be 40 in June, 40 in December. That would match this year, which Director Brown, Councilmember Brown, I'm sure that you recall, for a number of years, we were only able to budget a single class for a number of years. If you recall, in 2016, the mayor was able to, and council was able to increase our numbers to 65. But this year, in 2017, we were able to budget for 2 classes of 80, and we are very pleased to be able to do so again this year in this proposed budget. That will, the 80 will not only help us with respect to overtime, but will also help us to prepare for the new fire station, Station 35, which will open in the latter part of 2019. In police, 70 recruits are funded, 35 in June, 35 in December. This will greatly help us maintain our nationally accredited Division of Police. We have a Narcan expansion. The division will continue with this program that was started this year, and $150,000 is allocated to equip many additional officers with this life-saving drug to counter the heroin overdoses. We have a new and expanded neighborhood safety strategy funded in the amount of $2 million. It's a part of the mayor's overall comprehensive strategy that we announced several weeks ago. This $2 million will allow the Columbus Division of Police to effectively implement a year-round program while maintaining the necessary patrols for Columbus. The initiative will undoubtedly foster and enhance safety and police-community relations. We will continue to work with our partners at the Franklin County EMA and Homeland Security to maintain our outdoor sirens and mass notification systems. With respect to vehicles, we will continue to work with fleet management to determine the number of cruisers and unmarked vehicles from the, and other general fund light vehicles to be replaced in 2018. This year, we were able to purchase 60 police cruisers, 8 prisoner transport vehicles, and over 4 dozen other vehicles for the Division of Fire and Police. Some other programs and initiatives will be funded basically at the same level as this year. For example, the contract with Franklin County for the jail contract stands at $4 million. Our EMS billing company is $1.8. Community Crime Patrol, $375,000. Our partners at the Capital Area Humane Society, at again, $250,000. Truancy is funded once again at $75,000. And a very new innovative program is funded once again, our COPE Board. If you recall, this is the group of Columbus residents who helped pick our safety forces this year. It was wonderful. We will be continuing that in the next year, and again, that board is funded at $33,600 into next year. Of course, with respect to diversity, as Chief Jacobs and Chief O'Connor said, we are working very hard to increase our diversity, and we'll be announcing in the near future some innovative ways that we believe will help us increase our numbers. And police community relations. As you know, this past year, we have worked incredibly hard to ever engage the community to foster an even stronger partnership of trust and understanding. With that, thank you for your time, and we will be happy to answer any questions or concerns you may have about the public safety budget. And in closing, we certainly appreciate none of this great work of our dedicated officers and firefighters and our folks in support service. They could not do this without your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Speaks. I certainly, my colleagues and I appreciate the dangerous and hard work that our law enforcement personnel and our firefighters have to engage in every single day. And we respect that and appreciate to each of you our acknowledgement of the hard work you do. And please pass that along to your respective staff members. We understand that what you do to keep all of us safe is very, very demanding. The objective of this meeting tonight is to determine whether or not the budget is going to be adequately able to address those concerns for us to continue to provide the services for the citizens of Columbus. With that, I'd like to throw it open to my colleagues for any questions. I have some of my own, but I'd like to throw it open for any questions from my colleagues. Councilmember Page.
Thank you, Chair Brown. And again, I echo your comments. Thank you all for the work that you do to keep us safe. And this is a question for both chiefs or Director Speaks regarding the work that you're doing to diversify your forces. Do you have internal I guess, employees or staff that are working on it as well, or is it kind of in collaboration with the work that the Office of Diversity and Inclusion is doing?
Yes and yes. Each chief we've formed a committee. The committees are working with Steve. He's doing a fantastic job, and we're also doing outreach with various community partners to ever increase. We're coming up with some goals now. I don't have a plan we can share with you at this moment, but we're working very diligently on that. Chiefs, want to add anything?
We have full-time staff, have had for many years. We have a sergeant, 2 officers assigned to our recruiting unit. I have decided to add 2 more officers to that particular unit to help us out with another pipeline that has been very valuable to us in increasing our diversity, which is the Explorers program. So very soon you'll see an increase in the actual size of our full-time employees that are working on our recruiting efforts and our diversity efforts.
The Division of Fire has the same commitment. We have an internal group consisting of a lieutenant, a battalion chief, and 2 firefighters, and they're currently working on a revamping of our 10-year strategic plan that we're hoping to roll out the first part of the year in cooperation with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and Director Francis. And we're hoping, as Director Speaks says, that there'll be we've got some innovative ideas that we're hoping to be able to get off the ground in regards to creating pipelines for employment for diverse candidates throughout the city.
Councilman Stenziano.
Thank you, Chairman Brown, and I'll open up to all the panelists. We hear a lot of feedback of, do we have enough officers and firefighters? Overtime's high. Curious how we arrived at the 2 classes and the numbers that you presented. Is that sufficient for the needs to meet these goals? Explain a little bit if more were added, kind of how we arrive at that number and going forward to meet, and my instinct is it is to meet the goals and priorities allocated, but why did we get to those numbers?
Well, it's a very long process that's done in consultation with finance. And for what will the city's finances bear in terms of hiring additional folks? We also have an algorithm, if you will, trying to determine how many folks will depart employment from the city, retirements, folks moving away, et cetera. And then we look to add to that. So, for example, we know that we're opening a new fire station in 2019. Fire got more numbers this year. Couple significant reasons, although there's many, but 2 significant reasons is A, the volume of calls in fire keeps going up each and every year, not so much with respect to fire, but with respect to EMS runs. So A will help offset those increase in runs that we're receiving every year. Secondly, with respect to a new fire station, we need about 30 additional folks to open up Station 35. So this class of 80, which once again equals the amount that we have this year, which is wonderful in comparison to years past, will help us accomplish that goal of preparing to open up that station at Broadham Wagner in 2019.
President Pro Tem Tyson.
Thank you. 2 really comments, and the first is I appreciate the question that Councilmember Page asked about diversity in terms of our workforce, and now being here almost 24 years, it has certainly been a continual issue. I mean, obviously civil service for 13 and almost 11 years here, that it has been a concern to try to recruit minorities within both police and fire. And I know from my civil service days, it has always been, seems to be a challenge. And so I'm hopeful that, I think that having an Explorers program and other programs to build pipelines is really important, because just knowing how difficult it is to get through the standards to be able to be within any of these divisions, that an individual has to really have, really no blemishes in their background. And so to be able to make that happen, it does require that we build a pipeline. And so I'm excited about that. And I also think that because you're also going into the Columbus City Schools and the TAPS program, that hopefully people will begin to see, again, the police force. And you've got some great police officers, some young ones that are doing some great things, that I think that would help. But we really do have to, this has to be, I know it's a priority of the mayor, it is a priority, I think, for this community to to diversify our safety forces. So just look forward to hearing your comments as you have these new initiatives, to certainly share them with this body. The other statement I'll make is that I'm hopeful that with having the new police, not police, but the fire recruits, that we'll have 80 of them, that based upon, I know that this year, that overtime was higher in fire, but I do also understand that we added more EMS. I know that we also, added more people to, I think it's stationed down, the new one that opened back downtown. Is that 1 or 2? I don't know which one it is, or whatever one it is. Well, 3. Oh, well. So anyway, that station, and so I recognize there are reasons that has occurred. But I also just want to make sure that we're doing everything possible to manage overtime in the 2018 budget.
And I would ask just the Chief for briefly to talk about our calls for service this year, as I was talking before in terms of the increase in demand. Do you have any statistics you could share with us?
So far, excuse me, year to date, we're seeing about a 5% increase in run volume over the previous years. Our percentage of EMS runs has gone up. Over 81% of all calls for service are related to EMS. Council has, part of the budgetary process, has requested and basically mandated by ordinance that we respond over 80% of the time within 7 minutes to any area of the city of Columbus. That's what drives our metrics for how many units we want to place in service. Those 6 additional medics we placed in service this year were a direct result of the fact of us wanting to meet that 7-minute goal, and we are meeting that. That's one of what the accreditation standards did. And with the addition of Station 2 downtown that just reopened, that did require additional personnel. So these 80 personnel that are coming on will help us because there's a 6-month onboarding process that we have to get them through the training academy. So by allowing them to get hired in December of this year, they should come on board right around the time Station 35 is open. That would mean there wouldn't be a demand for overtime when that station opened, because that's what happened at 2, is that class won't actually graduate until February. That it will be to staff Station 2.
Chief Jacobs, could you speak to the issue about the Explorers program? I know there was issues with that program earlier on in the year, and you intervened. Would you elaborate for President Pro Tem Tyson what the program does and subsequently what the problems were?
The program has existed for many years in the Division of Police through the oversight of Learning for Life and volunteer efforts on the part of our own police officers. It has always been a volunteer thing. Occasionally, we were able to put an officer on special while they traveled to some competitions that the Explorers participate in, but it has all been on the backs of volunteer efforts. And there were additional funding circumstances. They wear uniforms. They need money for some of their programming. So they were unable to sustain it for a little while, and it came kind of to a head. And I said, well, what do you need? And they said, we need money and we need time. And I said, well, we'll find a way to do that. And so we are going to support that in a more professional way, I guess is the best way to put it. Allow them to use the time that they have at work to support not only that program, but our recruiting efforts. So they will have a focus on many pipeline programs that are part of the strategies that we're coming up with now, but also those that have been proven to work in the past.
Thank you. Administrator Pats, don't think we forgot about you. The status, can you give me the status and the timeline for completion of the for the 911 call center and the CAD upgrade? What's the timeline for all that to take place?
Councilmember Brown, we are in the midst of the upgrade. There's not a timeline for that upgrade to be completed. We're hoping the first quarter of 2018. But we are in the middle of that right now. We have another meeting in the morning to discuss what our next steps are. We're right in the middle of the upgrade. So at this time, we're hoping that it's the first quarter of 2018.
And is the vendor being cooperative about making this all happen, since I understand it has taken some time for this to get to this point?
They are now.
They are now.
Yeah, I had to...
We've had some meetings.
Yes. Please, elaborate.
I had to kind of give them a deadline. And we had been working with them for over a month for them to give us some solutions. They were hesitant to give those to us, so I told them they had a deadline, and they met it yesterday.
And the expectation with this upgrade will do what?
Technology is a wonderful thing when it works well. When there's problems that come up, it's difficult to solve them, and it has to do with our mobile public safety software that they're going to be installing in the cruisers and the fire apparatus. The service pack that we had in both of those, fire and police, were not going to work appropriately with the current 9.3 upgrade, so we have had to come up with an alternate solution, and they gave us 8 yesterday. So we're going to be making a decision on that in the morning and move quickly forward.
Well, I know how George can be, so I suspect he's gotten more involved in holding the vendor appropriately accountable to get this job done.
We will get it done on time and under budget, sir.
Thank you. With that, Chief Jacobs, obviously people have deep concerns about a variety of issues, but first and foremost, let's talk a little bit about the body-worn cameras. I know Director Speaks has had engagement with the State House. Why don't you bring us up to speed on exactly what the status is of that? Either one.
Oh, happy to. I'm very pleased that our implementation of body-worn cameras has gone seamlessly. It's been incredibly smooth, especially when you compare us to jurisdictions from around the country. I believe it's attributed to several factors. Number one, if you recall, we had a committee comprised of a very diverse group of community leaders. They helped map out an implementation plan. They helped promulgate our policies, and they also helped promulgate some suggestions to the Ohio Revised Code to protect privacy. I'm very pleased to report that 2 weeks ago, those privacy recommendations were drafted in a bill at the Ohio legislature, and we hope that those the revised code will be changed quickly. It's Representative Natami and Representative Craig, a bipartisan bill that so far has got great support. Secondly, our technology teams have done a tremendous job of first putting in the infrastructure with respect to fiber optics at our various police substations, with respect to the servers and the storage of the videos. Third, our police training academy has done a wonderful job. We're getting about 80 cameras out a month, and the training academy is doing a wonderful job of training our officers in how to use the cameras and what our policies are. As of end of this month, we'll have about 575 cameras in the field, and at this time next year, we'll be fully implemented at around 1,300 cameras. And again, I want to give thanks to the mayor and council. This has been a very significant initiative, and it will be about a $10 million project when all is said and done this time next year. Chief?
Chief?
If I could just add, I agree this has gone very well. Thought I turned that on. We have approximately 100,000 videos that we've already captured, and that's just since a year ago. So officers are using the cameras as we expect them to. We are watching the video for the investigations of our uses of force, for investigations about injuries to prisoners, and various other administrative tasks. We're also using them to look at what happened when a citizen complaint comes in, whether the evidence is in favor of the officer's behavior or not. We use that to add evidence that we wouldn't otherwise have. It's being used in court. It often results in plea deals when people realize that some of their behavior was caught on video. And so all of that's going very well, and we have 100,000 approximately already. That will continue to increase as the cameras do. We are doing a monthly report to track expenses. We're also doing a monthly report to see whether or not officers are properly classifying their videos. Most of the time when that does not occur, it's because they're not sure if the camera came on, and so they tap it again, which turns it off, and then they tap it again, which turns it back on. They didn't have time to classify it. But we monitor that. We tell them that it wasn't classified. They have to fix it. And so we're paying attention to that before it becomes a problem that we have to address down the road. We're trying to catch it early on and get muscle memory related to turning the cameras on when appropriate, turning them off when appropriate. And then we're also monitoring how much time is being used to watch that video and looking at some of our policies. If you can consider that every cruiser has cruiser camera in it, and every officer will soon have a body camera. Imagine how many hours of video will be accumulated for just one incident. And so we have now done a pilot project that we'll be implementing fully in telling our supervisors to look at the time of whatever it is that they're looking for, so they don't have to watch 10 hours if something happened in a 5-minute period. We believe that that is the best way to get our supervisors out of the substations and out on the road where they can better lead our officers while they're in the middle of an incident rather than following up later on. But we're paying a lot of attention to this program early on to make sure that we don't develop any bad habits with regard to turning it on, turning it off, not classifying things. And I believe that the majority of the officers, if not all, have found that it is a useful tool. And of course, they don't like the idea of forgetting to turn it off when they go to a private place, where they might have to relieve themselves. But nonetheless, they appreciate the fact that there is evidence of the things that they are doing so well. And we've used some of that video on our social media to highlight the dangers that our officers face and to explain how great a job they do.
Chief, just to elaborate a little more on the attitude on the part of the officers in the sense of their acceptance of having body cameras. And the second half of that would be, is someone paying close attention to the change in technology? The body cameras that we're purchasing now, are they going to be the same in 2 years from now as we move forward with technology, addressing the concerns you've expressed about when they come on and when they go off?
I should expect that the generation of camera that we're using now will be different within a few years. The developers are always coming up with new ideas. Some manufacturers are coming up with our belts to have a trigger that would turn on the camera if an officer removed any piece of equipment from his holster, the mace, the baton, the flashlight, all of those kinds of things. I think in part because some officers have trouble trying to get all that done while they're in the midst of a critical situation.
Of course.
But certainly the attitude that I have seen from the officers once they've received the camera, understand how to use it properly, and know what we're going to do with that video, they've come to like the idea that there's this evidence of what they're doing right. And knowing that if Internal Affairs is able to use that to determine the outcome of a complaint, that it will be a good thing for them generally. We are constantly talking about those private conversations that they need to watch their language. Very few people ever are scrutinized for every single word that they said, but because so much of their work will be recorded, they have to be very careful about what will be said and understand that the public may be listening. And so we are constantly trying to reinforce that these cameras are a good thing. And I believe that now if we tried to take the cameras back from some of those officers that have had them, they'd say, oh, no, give that back.
Chief, you had an officer who you expressed concern and was embarrassed with his particular conduct. You want to elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Certainly. So, I would say that there are a lot of stressors related to this kind of work. And I remember, 30-some years ago, the media might take a picture of some officers doing a guard duty outside of a critical scene, and the officers would be smiling, and they'd say, well, why are the officers smiling at this scene? And it wasn't because they were making fun of this scene. They were trying to relieve some of the tension and the stress that they feel in doing their jobs and maybe long hours of standing in the cold doing a guard duty. Officers have a tendency at times to try to relieve their stress by talking to other officers, and that's what happened with this particular one. It was inappropriate language. It was addressed. He was remorseful. He had heard it not just from me, but he heard it from his family, and I don't believe that it will ever happen again. And we have our supervisors that are out there that are making sure that their officers understand what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. But I would say that we have to understand that all of those officers that we hire are human beings, and we have to treat them accordingly. And everyone makes mistakes, including myself, and so we have to deal with them not only with just cause, but to make sure that doesn't happen again, but also to make sure that we have a force that will continue to serve the public, not only as they expect, but as they deserve, and move forward from here.
As a follow-up to that, the issue with the use of Narcan, it's a pilot program. It was a pilot program, and it's now being fully implemented. Would you elaborate for my colleagues and for the viewing audience how successful, and when I say successful, I mean from the standpoint of our officers being engaged to try and help someone, not the problem that we've got with the opioid crisis?
So, you know, the CFD actually responds to many of these overdoses, but they have to travel from their substations, their stations, when a call comes in. Our officers are out on the street all the time patrolling, or, you know, maybe near a scene when we get the overdose call. So oftentimes our officers are the first responder to an overdose. I recently saw on body camera a situation where 2 people had overdosed inside an apartment. There were 5 officers and 8 medical personnel in this one apartment for 2 people that had overdosed. It is a stress, it is a strain on our resources. It will continue to grow. We have too many deaths that are occurring, and that number is growing. But we have asked our officers to carry Narcan because we know that they may be close to a situation like that, and explain that this is no different than doing CPR if you're the first one there and somebody's having a heart attack, and that some of those people that you know, might overdose again tomorrow deserve that chance to live again, you know, and they are finding people this close to death. I know that CFD does as well, but our officers are here to save lives, and they try to do that every single day.
Chief O'Connor, how would you elaborate on the sheer volume associated with the opioid crisis and this budget's capability to make sure that you could be able to address the problems?
Right now, we're seeing what used to be, you know, before this opiate crisis became where it is today, we were responding on probably 1 or less a day. Typically now, in any given day, 12 overdose-related calls are not uncommon. 1 fatality in a day is not uncommon anymore, and that's the tragedy of the situation. What we're able to do now with the funding in the additional classes, with funding these additional medic units, is get that personnel and medical equipment there on the scene quicker than what we could have before. With those 6 additional medic units in cooperation with the Narcan support that we're getting from CPD, we're making a difference in lives. And that lives is being translated into recovery with the opening of the new center on the south end, with the addition of the REACT team that we partnered with Adam H. in regards to funding and things like that, to try to break that cycle and actually get treatment for these people instead of just running on and giving Narcan. So it's a global approach to try to solve a problem that unfortunately we still don't see the end to, or light at the end of that tunnel.
And the relationship with the emergency departments upon bringing patients in, how is that working out as well?
It's working out very well, especially with the REACT team. Now what's happening is when one of our medic unit transports a patient that's an overdose-related call to an emergency room, the REACT team will respond with mental health professionals and a paramedic from the Division of Fire. They'll respond to that ER to work with that nursing staff and the hospital staff there to try to get that person into a treatment program. Instead of just treating them and releasing them, now hopefully it's treat and transport to a treatment center for long-term care. So the hospitals have been very excited about this because they see the same frustration with repeated calls to the same people over and over again and no end. This is a way that everybody at least sees that there is a solution. It's just whether the means are going to be there to get there all the way.
And what has that done to your budget in the sense of additional allocation just to deal with the Narcan circumstance?
Well, I mean, the additional calls for service that we're going in 12 a day, I mean, we had to put 6 medic units in service. We're monitoring those medic units in regards to their run volumes. Right now, we have a manageable workload across all 38 of our medic units. But as the opiate spike comes in, we might see 30 in one day. And if that's the case, we have to do push staffing, which may require overtime to do that because we have to meet the demand of what the citizens are calling for at the time. And that's the hardest part about from an overtime budget, what contributes. Sometimes it's not run volume, it's having to protect areas just in case because of those response times and the other demands that are being placed on the organization.
And Chief Jacobs, if I'm correct, we have 1 officer who has administered Narcan over 24, 25 times, is that correct?
He has. This is a passion for him, and he is in an area where we suffer too many overdoses, one of our hardest hit areas, and that's where the pilot happened, and so he got a head start on a lot of our other officers, but he tries to go because he has developed a knack for being able to do this, and he cares very deeply about providing that service to the people that are in need.
And let me elaborate one more question for you, Chief. That is, division, we're currently doing CIT training and for all the new recruits, but the existing officers, anytime we have interaction with the public, and we do that all the time, or you do that all the time, the circumstances are the community is having mental issues. And we want our officers to be able to address that without, hopefully, having to use force. And that comes from better training and the cost associated with that. And you need to speak to that, please.
Certainly. I keep track of many of the instances where we save lives, whether it's a mental health crisis or a barricade situation. It's 26 pages long already, with just short paragraphs about the instances where officers have used communication skills, de-escalation. Some of those aspects are taught in the CIT training, but we also teach those same things starting in the academy for all of our recruits and continue to train them in scenario-based training throughout an officer's career. We are now at 387 CIT trained officers as of this class that will graduate January 5th. We've been doing CIT training for many years, but we've been able to increase the number of classes. Just recently, we've got a pledge from the instructors who are not division instructors, so we are at the mercy of the availability of other people in the community that are active practitioners at MH and all. And we are offering 9 classes next year for CIT training for more of our officers. So that should increase our numbers greatly. In addition to that, we've made a commitment to train our recruits. Our recruits won't have the experience that our veteran officers do, so though they'll have the training, they won't be in charge of a situation like our veteran officers are. But at least they get to experience the training and then see how it's implemented with more veteran officers, and then down the road we won't have to provide the CIT training to them as a veteran officer. They'll get it now. But we have a policy in place. Not just do we have them trained, but we have a policy in place that says if this is an incident that might involve somebody that's suicidal or somebody that might be experiencing a mental health crisis, the dispatchers are to dispatch a CIT officer if they're available. Unfortunately, they're not always available. They might be tied up on another run. We are experiencing a number of times where people just aren't available to dispatch anymore. But nonetheless, that's the policy, so we try to follow that, and we track it to see how well we're doing on that. We don't have the same mandates that the fire department does about response times and certain minimum staffing numbers and all that, but we do have to use overtime occasionally to get enough people to cover all of the calls for service that we have.
Chief, also de-escalation training for the community and for our officers. Elaborate. I know there's money in training for that in the budget. Exactly what are we trying to get accomplished? Obviously, I got a pretty good idea, but I think folks need to hear from you what the objective is with de-escalation training and the engagement of the community to accomplish that.
The culture of the agency is that we will use de-escalation tactics, communication skills to handle all of our calls for service, especially those that become resistive or somebody that doesn't want to necessarily go along with the officer's instructions. So we've been training officers in how to deal with a situation using communication skills for as many years as I can remember. We've had police psychologists come in and talk to officers in scenario-based training from the academy days on, and that's been going on for 40 years. It's now the thing that people recognize as what officers are trying to do, but we've been practicing it for a very long time. And it basically involves just slowing things down. We're going to try to talk to people. We have a policy in place also for our patrol officers. If they experience a situation where they believe that somebody might be armed inside of a building or a residence or whatever it might be, they aren't to just rush in. They're to take cover, they're to set up a perimeter and then call in SWAT. We've had a number of SWAT instances where somebody's barricaded. Maybe it's a mental health crisis. Maybe it's just an anger issue, or they don't want to go to jail for the warrants that they have. We spent recently 8 hours on a barricade situation involving one person, but 40 of our personnel, all of our SWAT, all of our K-9, all the patrol officers and supervisors that were at the scene to contain that, to evacuate neighboring residents that could have been shot by the person with the gun. These are the kinds of things that we do all the time. We have a lot of patience. Patience takes time, but our officers are dedicated to using that de-escalation, and that means time, distance, cover, barrier, all of those tactical situations that we come up with, we try to put those in place. Force is actually used relatively rarely. Of course, we have to use handcuffs and those kinds of things, but the actual application of force is extremely rare in the number of contacts that we have with our citizens and even in the number of arrests that we make.
Given the fact that violent crime is down, speak to the issue of homicides and what you're proposing to do and what this budget affords you to be able to do to address those concerns. This council is certainly sensitive to the problem in our society and certainly even more sensitive to the problem in the city of Columbus, as I know you are as well. But the things that the police division is attempting to do to try and address that. We've been very fortunate, and I don't mean to speak on subject matter from a different perspective, but EMS has been able to save a whole bunch of people because of their skill, capability, and their rapid response. But nonetheless, we have problems, not unlike other cities. But what are you proposing to do to try and address that?
So it is a very challenging situation. We've been averaging around 100 homicides a year for the last 5 or 6 years. And this year it's been a significant spike, 131. It is draining of our homicide detectives, but I don't know if this is a spike for 1 year or if it's a spike for many years. It's difficult to reassign people during a spike and then you have to deal with leaving them there or not. So we do have some strategies in mind. There are some officers that do some what I consider to be lower priority type of enforcement that we might have to abolish their jobs and move to doing more to work on homicides. We also have cold case detectives that follow up on homicides that are stale, if you will, that haven't been solved for many years, and we might reassign some of those cases to them. The lead on our homicide cases typically don't want to give up on those, but they're right now getting another case assigned to them every 2 or 3 days. And they aren't able to, if they haven't wrapped up the first case before they get the second case, then it does put a strain on them. So we're working on those kinds of strategies. I put out a call to the community the other day and asked them if they would please provide us with the tips. That's what solved the serial murders down in Tampa, when somebody called in a tip and said, I think that my coworker looks like the serial killer. And even though it was in the midst of thousands of tips, it solved that series. And we need that little bit of information. We have Crime Stoppers, we have tip lines, you can make an anonymous tip. So we've asked the community to help us in doing this. It's their neighborhoods. You address the number, we've had 11 double homicides this year. We've had a number of these shootings that have happened where groups are gathered. It's not just one person having a fight with another person, it's groups having fights with groups. Some of them are retaliatory. You shot my friend or maybe a possible gang member, and so we're going to retaliate. These are the kinds of things that are difficult because we're talking about people that don't necessarily want to talk to the police because they might be engaged in criminal behavior. We are getting calls after the fact, not before when the suspicious activity is happening. We're just getting a call that says that somebody's lying in the alley bleeding. And some of the people that are with those victims are picking them up and driving them to the hospital or leaving without telling us what's going on. So we need more community involvement to help us point out what might happen before it actually does. So we're looking at how we can deploy the number of officers that we have. As we've noted, this budget does not allow us to grow. Our number of officers per capita, per 1,000 residents, is from what looks like to me, the lowest that it's been in about 20 years. So while we have new tools and technologies to help us, solving homicides takes a lot of time, depending on the evidence that we have. Looking for the evidence. Now that we have video cameras in our neighborhoods, thanks to the support from the city, now that we have surveillance video on many of the businesses that are in our city, there's a lot more evidence to collect. Our crime lab, state-of-the-art crime lab, is backed up. It can't process all the DNA as fast as we can. We have a state-of-the-art gun crimes unit. We are doing the best practices in this country as far as following gun crimes and finding out whether or not that gun has been used in multiple crimes. And indeed, that's what happens. We see that guns are being used across the city in multiple crimes. So we're doing a lot of different things, but we are considering taking people from one place and putting them in another, because that's what the situation is right now. Without being able to grow, I have to abolish some people's jobs to create another job someplace else.
And Chairman Brown, let me also add that, as you know, the mayor just announced a comprehensive neighborhood safety plan. So, for example, I spoke earlier regarding the $2 million in the neighborhood fund that will allow Chief Jacobs to make special assignments utilizing overtime. We have started our Safe Streets initiative, an initiative that started in the Linden neighborhood that we're going to expound upon, putting officers on bikes and out of their cruisers to interact with their residents and hopefully get some of those greater information and tips from those folks to help solve crime. As you know, we just launched our Safe Neighborhoods program with the Franklin County Common Police Court, the County Prosecutor's Office, the Federal Prosecutor's Office, various social agencies such as the Columbus Urban League, Alvis 180. The goal of this program is to reduce the violence in our community, and it's aimed toward folks who are on probation, who've committed violent crime before, generally with a gun, and we're trying to intervene in their lives to keep that from happening. As you know, Columbus Public Health, as part of this comprehensive strategy, is studying the roots of crime and what we can do about it. Our Department of Neighborhoods is forming the crisis response team and looking at things such as neighborhood infrastructure. Where can we increase our lighting at night to prevent crime? Looking at where are those abandoned vacant houses that we can go after in conjunction with the city attorney's office. We're looking at the safety committee being formed with our liaison officers to do even more, bringing folks together in a neighborhood together and get that communication and trust going between the police and the community. So not only are we focusing directly on intervention with the police, but in this budget we are also allocating monies for intervention and prevention with other community partners.
Before I go to Councilman Harden, Chief, approximately how many guns, this is December 13th, how many guns have we confiscated to the best of your knowledge so far this year?
Well, we count totals, and then we also count those that are recovered from people. We're over 2,000 guns that have been, we call them gun crime, or crime guns, so guns that were involved in crimes. There's another couple hundred or so that we've already recovered this year that were turned in by people that just don't want a gun in the house. But more than 2,000 have been involved in crimes or on somebody that could have been as a result of a search warrant or some type of an arrest warrant. Last year, so we're over 2,000 already for this year. Last year was around 1,800, and the year before was about 1,700.
So the numbers are significantly up for gun crimes and guns being confiscated as you attempt to try and work those through cases to determine whether or not they were or not used in the course of a crime.
Absolutely. We try to tie them to the people that might have used them.
And again, before I turn to Councilman Harden, to Chief O'Connor, our firefighters, I know at one time they were having appropriate body armor. Is that still available to our officers, to the firefighters when they have to respond to a dangerous environment?
Yes, all of our medic units carry body armor for our EMS personnel and our EMS supervisors. We're in the process of doing a replacement on that. We're getting about 1/3 of a replacement cycle, and that's part of the budgetary process, as well as some ballistic helmets that are needed for some of these active violence incidents that Chief Jacobs mentioned earlier, that we have cooperative training that we both go in together to try to interdict while a situation's still going on. So all those things are part of this budgetary process for 2018.
And obviously those costs are significant. Councilman Harden?
Thank Thank you, Chair Brown, and thank you, Chiefs. Certainly want to echo my colleagues' appreciation for the folks who put their lives on the line every day, protecting our communities, both in fire and police. Kind of following up from what Director Speaks just spoke about in terms of those other things that we do to keep folks safe. Certainly we have homicide rate this year, 131, that is more than recent years, and any is unacceptable, but previous to this public hearing, Chair Page or Councilmember Page held a Recreation and Parks hearing, and I asked her the question, given our homicide rates, we know that it's not just police's responsibility to help us fight that. What are they doing to be good partners, community partners, to bring down that rate? Deputy Director kind of went through a good list, but I was wondering from you, Chief, who are those other community partners that we rely on outside of just our traditional policing that will help us to combat this homicide rate and just policing in general as we think about the community?
I believe that we need to do as much as we can to keep people in safe places, and libraries, boys and girls clubs, places that we've actually gone out and done dialogues at, I believe are great places for us to ask the community to help us keep kids safe, in particular, keep them away from gangs, give them something to do when they might not have adult supervision someplace else, maybe at home, a place to do homework. Those are all, I believe, ways to prevent kids from being involved in violent crime. We do see a number of children that start at an early age committing crimes, and we need to stop that in the earliest we can. And I believe that they want supervision. And I know that our libraries are good places for that, the Boys and Girls Clubs, having mentors, the Big Sisters, Big Brothers programs are good. Churches, I mean, after school programming at churches, playing basketball, all of these things where we try to also go and be present so that they feel safe and to see us in a good light, I believe will help our community learn how to not only keep the kids safe, but give them a good future. And in addition to that, just making sure that our community assists us with telling us what's going on. When they have those kids and young adults in their presence, they might hear something that they can then pass on to us. And having those relationships of us stopping in at the recreation centers, I believe, is extremely important for us to keep those lines of communications open.
So I was going to ask just to follow up on the trauma-informed care through public health. Is that a relationship that is developing, or how is that relationship as we work through parts of what the mayor rolled out in terms of combating through that preventative work?
So actually the state of Ohio mandated trauma-informed policing for all sworn police officers in the state of Ohio this year. And we completed ours back in almost a year ago. We get our in-service training done early. So we had 6 hours of trauma-informed policing for every police officer in Columbus, and then we offered that training to other agencies that wanted to train with us. Basically, that just tells officers that, the people that you face, whether they be children or whether they be adults, and sometimes the adults that we face when we're in an arrest situation might have been raised in a home full of trauma. They might suffer from PTSD, and certainly their response to us might be based on past experience with the police. It might be based on past experience in a violent scenario. So we've taught our officers how to understand that and then to behave in a way that accepts that this might be driving some behavior and how to deal with that appropriately. We talk all the time about officers having the surges of adrenaline. You can't prevent it from happening, it just happens. But the people that we're dealing with are also experiencing adrenaline, sometimes panic and anxiety. And so we've tried to get them to understand that these are situations that are very volatile, and the more compassion, the more communication skills, the more de-escalation and patience, better outcome for all.
I wanted to add that we simply cannot police ourselves out of violence, and these partnerships are vital. So, for example, through Chairman Brown's leadership, we had a gang summit this past summer. We employed a person, Sean Stevenson, who was a member of the very perhaps first gang here in the city of Columbus, spent 20 years in federal prison, and now has dedicated his life to keep kids from going down that path. It was a very successful intervention. Parks and Rec also, through contracts, employs a number of gang interveners that go out and try to de-escalate and get the lines of communication going, and so things don't erupt into violence. So it's critical that police and the city as a whole take this holistic approach and utilize our partners.
I would just add that we also have a great relationship with the schools, between our school resource officers that are present in the high schools, and now oftentimes in the middle schools. They are able to rotate among the middle schools. But we also have a TAPS program that is going on, which is, in my opinion, one of the better practices in the country for trying to engage youth that are already kind of having some social distance between the police and themselves, might have gotten in a little bit of trouble and need to be mentored by some officers as role models. So we have a great relationship with school security, and again, community partners that can help us understand better the cooperation that we saw when we had an active threat at the Scioto School between the school personnel and the police personnel that were present there went a long ways towards being able to address that in a very quick fashion without anybody getting hurt.
Chief, also, Chief Jacobs, community policing, but still from the standpoint of how much time do you think your officers have who are involved in patrol on doing community policing, being able to spend time? I know they go from run to run to run, but part of that whole objective is to spend time in the community. That's one question. And also, are members of the community involved in training and for police officers so that they get to hear from Councilman Brown or someone else, for that matter, who spends time in the community to help give them a different perspective as opposed to hearing from a police officer who does the training?
So community policing, I believe, is one of the things that is a part of the culture of the Division of Police. Our officers engage all the time. We track community engagement events, but not every community contact, but more than 300 contacts are made every single month. In some months, it's much higher than that. It's double that. So we track it just to show that this is part of our culture, is to engage with our community. Of course, you know that we have CLOs, that is their full-time job. But we have 5 dedicated bike units, community response teams that don't take calls for service, but are out there looking for not just crime, but trying to follow up on some of the community concerns that they might hear from a community meeting or a crime strategy meeting. And all of that is community policing because it means we're responsive to such things. The other day when we had one of our latest homicides, I looked at our calls for service. We had 140 active incidents going on in the middle of the afternoon, and 60 calls are waiting to be dispatched. There's not that many officers working. Those are numbers that our citizens at the other end of that call that's waiting are wondering what we're doing. And we're trying to figure out how we can let them know that it's not because we don't care about them, it's just that things are busy. And so the community policing that we try to do when we have that time is extremely important to build up the trust when we're not there. I got to the scene of an accident first the other day, and they're like, yeah, we've been waiting like a half an hour. And I'm like, I understand, you know, it's a big city now. And so we're going to have to try to educate our community about why we might not be able to get there as quickly as possible. But that's part of the job that we have, is prioritizing incidents and making sure that people understand. We're going to try to implement a system where we'll let our community members that have called us understand what the resolution was. I believe that's an additional level of service that they might get. That person that called in that accident might have driven on by it, but we're going to maybe give a call back to them and just say, thank you for letting us know. And letting them know that it's important to us that you took the time to call us. That's community policing, is is giving people not only the service that they deserve, but the answers that they deserve and might have. But it's difficult, and those days are unpredictable, just like, Kevin said. Some days you might have 12 runs, and some days you might have 30 runs on, an overdose or something like that. They're unpredictable, but we can't staff for those high days. We have to staff for the regular days. But I do believe that our officers in between those calls are trying to do that. I've encouraged them to get out and to be engaged in our dialogue sessions, because it's not only good for our community members to hear what officers have to say and see them in a non-enforcement situation, but it's good for our officers to get to know some of our community members and how much they actually do support us, because there's a tremendous amount of support out there, and they need to see that and feel it in a situation that's not a call for service. So it's extremely important that we continue to do those community policing efforts. It does take a little bit of time. You get out of your car, you're walking around, you're talking to people, but they truly appreciate that time and attention that we can give to them. And I think there was another part to the question that I don't exactly remember. The second part was?
Well, the part of the question was the obviously community policing and the time spent, but how many times do we have people from the community who spend time actually engaged in the instruction and talking to our police recruits or officers who are already at work to hear from community members?
Right.
This is what they're hearing so that our officers can have a better understanding from that perspective.
I had it for a little while, and then it slipped.
Yes. Well, you went to a call, Chief. I mean, you responded to a call on your own. That's, well, okay.
So even in the academy, especially when we're doing our diversity training, we bring in members of our community to talk to our recruits. Our recruits come from near and far. And some of them have never been in a big city, and some of them have lived in a big city their entire life. Even though our diversity might not look as great as it could be, we still have a diversity of cultures, religions that come to our academy. And so we try to make sure that we mesh all of that and have an appreciation for different cultures and different races, genders, orientations, and all of that. And so we bring in people from Bravo, we bring in people from different faiths, and have them talk to our recruits. So they're not police officers, they're actually community members that do that. And then part of our dialogue, I consider that to be training as well. But we try to engage our community members as we can. We ask them to help us out with some of our other recruit training. They come in, and the Citizen Police Academy alumni are a great help to us, and they interact with our officers as well. We'll continue to look for other opportunities where we can engage community members, but when we are training 1,900 officers around the clock that work on 5 different shifts, it's even hard for me to get them all trained and to meet with them. So it's hard to get community members that can go to that type of that level of in-service training, but we integrate them into some other programs, and certainly in the dialogues and the ongoing sessions that we have with community meetings.
So if someone is watching this program and they wanted to engage and come and teach or offer their perspective on the community, who would they contact, Chief?
Well, part of the budget calls for, the mayor has asked us to create neighborhood safety advisory groups, and so we'll be putting out a call for people that want to volunteer to be a participant in that. As they work with us, it will be, maybe some of the people that have already engaged in community service on their own free time, but we expect some new people might join us with these committees where they'll learn from our CLOs what's going on, and then they'll find a way or a niche that they might be able to help us with as well. So we plan to offer even more opportunities for people to engage with us, the dialogue sessions, when other groups convene, different groups, I bring the police to them. We've got an exciting community engagement program coming up that will start at the end of January that I'm very happy to say will be another opportunity for officers and community members to just spend some time together and get to know each other as human beings.
Likewise, we'll be advertising in March for the COPE board, which is, again, our residents helping to pick our public safety forces, hiring them. And in March, look for that. That will be going out.
Administrator Pats, one more question for you with regards to the change in the way in which obviously we do dispatching, but the connectivity with the sheriff's office and others, do you think that's going to assist? Heaven forbid, the bad guys don't know that they can drive anywhere they want in the city, out of the city, but the connectivity, I think, has a lot of validity to it. How would you speak to that?
If you're talking about 911, what's going to happen is all the 911 calls will be going into 3 major hubs and then transferring out to the agencies. Eventually, within probably the next couple of years, you're going to see a statewide EZNet that's going to be able to carry all 911 calls across the state, and it'll be seamless at that point. There'll be no coming to us and going to Reynoldsburg. It'll go straight to Reynoldsburg because they'll all be connected to the EZNet network. So it doesn't make any difference where they're at. The wireless 911 calls and the wired 911 calls will eventually go into these 3 hubs. No one will know any different. You're going to be, wherever you're calling from, you're going to hit the closest tower. And that's some of the issues that we've been seeing with 911 calls. If you're at the north end of Arlington, you're going to hit the Dublin comm center. If you're in the south end of Upper Arlington, you're going to hit the Columbus comm center. But we do the transfers as appropriate, but that's going to cut down that transfer because there are only going to be 3 major hubs.
And Chief O'Connor, on mutual aid. I know you have a mutual aid agreement program throughout the tri-state area. Is that still assisting us, or is it causing us problems with regards to other agencies coming into the city to try and assist based on call volume and the issues you've got?
The mutual aid is staying fairly stagnant. We're running about 20% of our calls for service are mutual aid, and that's either us going out or them coming in to assist us. With fire, because we don't have some of the jurisdictional limitations by law, we can cross jurisdictional lines and provide care for fire, EMS. Everybody in Franklin County belongs to that automatic response agreement, which means that everybody is committed to the fact that they want the closest appropriate piece of equipment responding to that person's emergency without regard to jurisdictional lines. One of the things that we have to do to keep in mind, though, is we have to be good neighbors in the fact that we have to be able to provide for the citizens of Columbus and not require that demand of another township to provide us more resources than they should. And that's where we're constantly using these measurements to try to determine where that would be. Right now, we have 2 areas of Columbus that we're concentrating on. We've done that with additional medic units going into service, both on the east side and on the west side, to help eliminate that demand that we need from our township partners. One of the things from the 911 center, though, that we think will help out a lot in this is the regard to the Administrator Pat mentioned the FATPOP software program. We think that's going to help eliminate some of that extra delay in regards to the time it takes to get those resources there, so we'll have a better predictability in regards to timing and get the closest piece of equipment there the quickest. And that software is going to be eliminate phone calls between agencies, which hopefully should allow us to expand our capabilities as well.
And I have one last question. Let's see if President Pro Tem has one, but I think this involves Chief Jacobs and you, Chief O'Connor. I have an issue with traffic. When there's a car crash on the interstates, our ability to respond, to deal with that, and heaven forbid someone is hurt, but the numbers for distracted driving are up, as we all well know. So from a traffic unit perspective, Chief, how, from a staffing aspect, how are we handling that in the community? Given the fact that the population is growing, given the fact that we have more people on our roads, when there's a crash, I got to get to work, and you got to get to work. How are we addressing that concern?
I've noticed that rush hour is not an hour anymore.
No.
Rush hour seems to be stretching out into a couple of hours now, and I think commute times are actually increasing. But we have more people and more cars. It's still the favorite way to travel around here, and so our freeway patrol pays a lot of attention to our freeways, and they have a responsibility for clearing our accidents that occur there. We have a policy in place that says that if you're able to get the cars off the freeway, that's what you do before you start taking the report. And so it's a quick clear. We try to get them down off of the freeway so that they're in a safe place and so that the freeway traffic can get back to normal as quickly as possible. Of course, sometimes the cars are disabled and we have to wait for a tow truck, but nonetheless, we're calling for the freeway to be cleared up as quick as possible. Occasionally, if it is a serious injury accident, we do have to either restrict lanes and or close down the freeway temporarily. That's a major deal, and we are seeing that we have more than 60 traffic fatalities already this year. Some of those are pedestrians that are being killed. And I think with you that distracted driving is one of the issues there. People aren't noticing everything that's going on outside of their vehicle. And maybe even some of the pedestrians are not paying attention to the vehicles that are on the road as well. They even happen at night. And so we have to do more about alerting our driving population that they need to stop looking at their phones and start looking at the roadway and what their surroundings. We are continuing to do our efforts with regard to OVI enforcement. We did stop doing the checkpoints in Columbus, but we have increased our OVI task force and are actually getting better results with the task force when we have the personnel available to do that. We use some grants to provide some of the overtime that it takes to have more officers out on the street doing that type of enforcement. But driving on the freeway is a priority of us. We have a dedicated section led by one of our better lieutenants that is out there every day making sure that the freeway patrol officers are doing that. They issue cites all the time. Day after day after day. They were the pilots with our body camera program and found that to be beneficial to them. And we'll continue to do everything that we can to reduce the number of traffic fatalities. It's one of those things that doesn't get the attention, perhaps, that a homicide does, but it's still a tragic death, and they are oftentimes preventable. And so we need to do what we can in efforts to keep that down.
But we would ask for the public's patience, realizing that either they're receiving vital medical care or police is trying to ensure that others aren't hurt or trying to determine who's at fault for that accident. And that takes time.
Chief O'Connor?
Yeah, we've worked in cooperation with CPD in regards to the quick clear. We're trying to do the same thing. We're educating our members in regards to how much lanes need to be blocked from a safety standpoint and allow traffic at the same time. Many times we might have units that arrive on the scene before the officers, and they've been given the same instructions as the officers. If there's no medical emergency going on or patient care, they're instructed to help them get the cars off the road and get the road open back up, and then provide information to the police in regards to where they got moved to. So all those things, distracted driving is something that when we're on the scene, we have to be cognizant of, because the distracted driver could still be the one coming down the road, and that's one of the things that does have to have traffic blocked off for, because we have to protect our personnel. So it's a combination. We're dealing with in the forefront when we're dealing with the accident caused by a distracted driver, then we're having to protect our members and officers from distracted drivers while they treat that incident. So it's a constant battle that we're trying to find, and a balance that we're trying to equate.
Director Speaks, you're about to say something.
Please be patient.
President Pro Tem, do you have any other questions? At this time, we'll take additional public comment. I'll call the name of the individuals that filled out a speaker slip in the order in which they were turned in. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. Please share your name, address, and the organization you represent before you begin your statement. I have a gentleman, Michael Vinson. Is that correct? Mr. Vincent, would you please state your name and any organizations you represent, sir, and your address?
Greetings. My name is Michael Vincent, council members, and I'm speaking on behalf of no organization, but on behalf of community members who did not have a voice here tonight, could not be here. First, I'm going to read a statement that was prepared by those members, and then I'm going to respond to some of the things that I heard tonight. So here's the statement. It says, we're here tonight to express concern regarding the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge Number 9 union contract. We urge council to stand on the side of families who have been directly affected by police violence and fellow taxpayers and voters, both here tonight and in our communities, outraged over how our tax dollars are being spent. We're calling on council and city leadership to focus funds in the city's 2018 budget that follow the protocol of other cities who have strengthened community voice and protections in their contract with the Fraternal Order of Police. Require that all Columbus police officers, after inappropriate use of force actions, the unauthorized conduct of enforcement actions in plain clothes, and or after discharging their firearm, immediately be required to, 1, provide their statement on the incident in question. 2, provide a mandatory drug test. And 3, permanently maintain a public record of any complaint or disciplinary action taken against an officer by an entity, effectively removing any option for expungement. Also, we are calling on council and city leadership to reserve 6 of the 11 seats on the Columbus Community Safety Advisory Commission to be family members directly affected by Columbus police violence and community supporters of their choosing. And finally, to enter into a community collaborative agreement similar to Cincinnati as the city of Columbus with community residents affected by police violence, the Columbus Police Department, and the Fraternal Order of Police, Capital City Lodge number 9. That is the end of the statement. I'm now going to respond to some of the things that I've heard tonight. One was there's a lot of talk about diversity quotas, and I think it's important for you to consider that the the Ohio Civil Rights Commission filed charges against the Columbus Police Department in 2016 for their handling of racial slurs. Also want to point out that our community still have not received justice for racially motivated police killings of Trey Darson, Keith Berg, Tyree King, etc. Also want to talk about or respond to the 40 years of de-escalation training that the Columbus Police Department has received, and I have to disagree. I also want to request from the chief if she could let us know how many people have been murdered by police officers in the last 30 years, along with their names. A lot of people in my community cannot seem to get this information from the Columbus Police Department. Also, I want to respond to this talk about pipelines. You know, it just sounds like the commodification of human beings. But one thing that a lot of people aren't talking about is the school-to-prison pipeline, which the police are responsible for. The police, they cycle people in and out of jails and prisons. We know that incarceration does not deter crime. As Councilman Brown stated, the violent crime has actually gone down. So I want to respond to what people were talking about as far as like a police response to incidents involving people who are having mental health crises. What we know from the evidence is that the threat of violence actually exacerbates these calls. Therefore, we can't expect the police to be part of the solution. No amount of training is really going to help with that. The police are essentially trained to shoot and kill people. Another thing I want to respond to is this talk about body cams, and you know, body cams is not the solution to the problem. You know, you could collect thousands of video footage, but what happened, like what happened to the dash cam videos, the thousands of those that conveniently came up missing, is that you end up you're going to be wasting a whole lot of taxpayer dollars on surveilling communities that don't want to be surveilled. Another thing I want to respond to, it involves the traffic-related incidents and the failed assumptions or the false assumptions of you know, the public regarding the bulk of law enforcement functions. The bulk of law enforcement functions doesn't go towards catching people who are engaged in violent crimes like murder or rape or child abuse, et cetera. Actually, the bulk of law enforcement functions are traffic related. They involve the citation and the policing of people who commit minor infractions like speeding. There was like 34,000 of those charges. Seatbelt violations, people driving too close to another car, people driving without a suspended license, and you know, it's the false assumption that the bulk of police work is about catching violent people engaged in violent crimes. But you know, we can see from that is not the case. If you want to solve the problem of traffic safety, vehicular homicide, you know, traffic accidents, you don't keep allocating millions, hundreds of millions of dollars toward the police. What you do is you change your transportation policy. You implement a policy that is about investing in mass public transportation systems that don't revolve or involve fossil fuel extractive technologies like hydraulic fracturing, because natural gas, which is what the COTA bus line uses, is not a clean fuel. I want to
Mr. Vincent.
move on to...
Mr. Vincent.
Yes, I'm about to wrap up my comments. I only have 1 minute left. If you please allow me.
Let me elaborate for you. I'm allowing you to go on because there isn't any other speakers, so I would like for you to wrap it up.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you again, Councilmember Brown. So I'm almost done with my responses, but another thing I want to call to your attention is that there is a nationwide campaign to divest from the police and reinvest into our communities. I'm looking at the budget. You're talking about giving 54% of the budget to the police. That's $332 million. That's a lot of money you're giving or you're paying for higher guns at a time when, a lot of our people are suffering from poverty. Ohio ranks 3rd in the nation in households that live with severe food insecurity, meaning that they have to skip meals in order to get through the day. Evictions, I think there were like 17,000 evictions processed through the court system this year. But yeah, you want to give 11 or 13 million more dollars to the police department. What I'm calling for actually is you to divest from the police and, look at what you did, or what the council did between 2008 and 2009, when there was a decrease in the police budget of about 5%. So, finally, what I want to respond to is this talk about Narcan and the opiate crisis, which I think is, like when black folks were going through the crack epidemic, there wasn't really a whole lot of public support for black people that are suffering from drug abuse. There was a war on drugs declared. Black people were criminalized as a result of that. And so what I'm saying is that the solution is not to equip police officers with Narcan. The solution is just to decriminalize drug use in the war on drugs, because the war on drugs is actually a war on people. And in United States of America, that means a war on black people. And then, I also want to say, speak to the idea of divesting from the police and why that is necessary. Is because the foundation, when you look at the history of the modern police force, they originated from slave patrols, right? This is their foundation. So when the Ohio Civil Rights Commission files charges against them that are based on this foundation of chattel slavery and racism, there's no amount of reforms that's going to be able to fix this department. So that's why I'm calling for you to divest, reduce the annual budget of police or the police department by 5% per year, and reallocate those funds towards community-based alternatives to our conflicts that don't involve the state. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Vincent. And as I said, I took the time to allow you to go beyond what I would normally allow, which is only 3 minutes. But I think the subject matter, as you brought it up, is worth discussing. If you would take the time, the gentleman to your immediate left, over your left shoulder, Mr. George Speaks, would be more than happy to debate and to discuss the issues that you've brought up in a variety of different ways. I am not going to say whether or not I agree or disagree with your concerns, but I think they need to be addressed. So thank you very much for coming down and expressing yourself.
Thank you.
If members of the community have any further questions or concerns, please feel free to contact the Department of Public Safety at 614-645-8210 or my office at 614-645-4605. In closing, I'd like to thank my fellow council members and certainly President Pro Tem Tyson for being here. I'd like to thank Mayor Ginther, Auditor Dorian, who is retiring, and City Attorney Pfeiffer, who also is retiring, and Director Pettis for their leadership in this budget process. In addition, I'd like to recognize Assistant Director George Speaks. Thank you. Assistant Director Kate Pisciotti and Mr. Echo Dennis, and the entire Department of Public Safety for their staff and their role in this budget process. I'd also like to thank Chief Jacobs and Chief O'Connor and Mrs. Patch for their presentation this evening. I would like to thank my staff, Denise Foster-Friend, or Denise Friend Foster, I'm sorry, and Grant Ames for their assistance in preparing this evening's hearing. And finally, I'd like to thank the community for their engagement in tonight's proceedings. Upon the conclusion of tonight's hearing, I, along with my fellow council members, will review the public safety budget in more detail than we have, based on information provided to us this evening. And I know that Director Speaks and Chief O'Connor and Chief Jacobs and Administrator Pats will be available for questions and follow-up as we get more detail with regards to the budget. President Pro Tem, do you have any comments? Hearing none, thank you all very, very much, and everyone have a good evening and a happy holiday.
Please drive safe and be patient on your drive home, Director Brown. Two habits.